At some point, everybody in life has gotta bleed. Some people will bleed more than others, right? Now, we never actually think about it, but what is inside the blood? What is actually going on there on a small level, on a cellular level? So in this video, that's what we're going to be talking about. We're going to be talking about the constituents of blood. What is going on inside the blood? Now, what system is blood a part of? Yes, it's part of the circulatory system. In our body, we have many systems, right? We have, for example, we have many, but I'm just going to list a few. We have the digestive system that's going to handle our food. We have our respiratory system that's going to handle bringing in oxygen and getting rid of carbon dioxide. We have an immune system that's going to fight infections. We also have this circulatory system, and its main job is to make sure that the cells of our body can get the nutrients they need. And it works, it has three parts: the heart, the vessels, and blood. All of these comprise the circulatory system. In a previous video, I covered the heart and I also covered vessels. So we're only going to focus on the blood itself today. But overall, the big idea is this. If we look at this guy and we look inside, right, a human being, we can see that the heart lies somewhere in the chest, right? Now, the heart is connected to a bunch of vessels, right? So we can already see two components of the circulatory system: the heart that is connected to all these vessels. The vessels serve as like a road that will carry the blood to the tissues, okay, to the cells that need it. And the heart's just going to be the pump. The heart's going to provide the force that allows this blood to move inside these vessels to all the cells. Now, two key things. We have two kinds of vessels, right? Arteries and veins. Arteries will carry blood away, A for away, A for artery, right? Arteries will carry the blood away from the heart to the tissues that need it, to the cells that need this blood, right? And arteries will have and then after the tissues or the cells use that fresh blood, they will make some waste, like carbon dioxide, right? Now, another vessel called veins will bring blood towards the heart, okay? So it'll bring this waste, used blood, towards the heart. The heart will then pump that blood to the lungs, and the lungs will kind of clean it and put oxygen into it and remove the carbon dioxide and send the blood back to the heart. Now the heart can again send this fresh blood out of the arteries to the cells that need it. So the key concept is that we have two kinds of vessels: some that take it away, called arteries, and some that bring it towards the heart, called veins. Now, what exactly is inside of these vessels? We're going to look at that now. So here's the image that I used for the blood vessel video. We can see the arteries taking blood away to the capillaries. The capillaries are located at the cells that need the blood, and the capillaries are special because they are permeable. So the blood inside, the nutrients can leave the capillary and supply the cells that are around this area. Whereas the arteries cannot, nothing can leave the arteries. It can only leave the capillaries. And then the veins will carry this waste blood back towards the heart, okay? That's the big idea. But the question is, what exactly is inside the blood that we care about so much? And my answer is that all three of these vessels have pretty much the exact same things inside of it. So we're just going to take a look at it. We're going to take a look at what is inside blood. So here we have a vessel, and we're going to look exactly what's going on inside. There's a couple things we need to point out. Let's start with this one, because I reckon you guys will probably know this one. Okay. So we slice someone open. Now they're bleeding. What is inside here? What are we looking at? Because when you slice someone open, when you cut someone, all that's happening is you're cutting one of these vessels. You have managed to slice open one of these vessels. Now that one of these vessels are sliced open, blood can now also leave through that hole, and that's the blood you see. So when someone is bleeding, it just means their vessels were damaged, cut open. Now the things can leave. Okay, let's start with this one. Like I said, what do you think this one is? It's red, and it's a cell. So it's a red blood cell, also known as an erythrocyte. Erythro means red, and cyte means cell. So a red blood cell, basically. Okay, it's the science way of saying it, but you need to know it. So erythrocyte is a red blood cell. What do you think the purpose is of a red blood cell? So a red blood cell, as we know, carries oxygen. So it's going to move around and carry oxygen to our capillaries, right? Here, and the capillaries will, in the capillaries, the oxygen will diffuse out of the red blood cells and go to the cells that need it. So the red blood cells will stay inside the vessel, but the oxygen inside of it will diffuse out outside of the capillaries where the cells are, and the cells can use that oxygen to survive. Now, at the same time, the carbon dioxide can be made and released by the cells because carbon dioxide is a waste product, right? So the carbon dioxide can go into the red blood cell and it can carry it back to the heart. So basically, the red blood cell just carries oxygen. That's the key part you need to know. And guess how much of our blood is red blood cells? 40%, around 40% of our blood. So when we look at this, 40% of it is actual red blood cells. Okay, and also the reason why our blood looks red is because of red blood cells. They make your blood look red because they are red. Okay, so therefore your blood looks red. But red blood cells are only 40% of this. So what else is there? There's also fluid. So inside your blood, there's a lot of fluid. Remember, red blood cells are just cells. So your red blood cells are kind of dissolved or floating in this fluid. What do we call this fluid? It's like a watery thing. It's a watery, yellowy fluid, which we can't see that clearly here, but it's like in this diagram, but it's like a fluid. So there's a lot of fluid, and inside this fluid, we have this red blood cell, among other things. So this fluid, guess how much of our blood is due to this fluid? What volume of our blood is due to this fluid? Around 60%. So you can see the combination of our plasma and our erythrocytes is almost all of our blood. It's almost 100%, slightly less than 100%. So, like I said, plasma is just a liquid. Don't worry, I'm going to put words on the next slide so you can check that out and read it slowly if you want to understand it better. But plasma is just like a liquid, it's a fluid in which all of these other things are dissolved in, kind of floating in, okay? And it's also got some small proteins and other little molecules in it, but you don't need to worry about that. You just need to know the name plasma and that it's basically a liquid, okay? It's what makes the blood liquid. Without plasma, your blood would just be solid. Okay, next, this other kind of cell. What do we think we can call this kind of cell? There are two of them. White blood cell, also known as leukocyte. Leuko, again, means white, and cyte means cell. So we can call it a leukocyte. You need to know both names. It's important because this is the sciencey name. Now, what do white blood cells do? White blood cells, there are many types of white blood cells. You don't need to worry about that for now, maybe for another chapter, but just know there are multiple types of white blood cells, and their job is to fight infection. It's when you get infected by a virus or a bacteria or a parasite, something like that, your white blood cells will help fight that infection so that you can stay alive, right? Now, I told you that erythrocytes are around 40%, slightly less, and plasma cells are slightly less than 60%. So you can imagine the rest of it is because of leukocytes. Leukocytes and one other thing called platelets. So these two are the minority. They're so small. If you take a look at blood, it'll be very hard to find leukocytes and platelets, but very easy to find erythrocytes. Okay, now what is platelets then? So platelets is basically a small fragment, a small piece of a cell. So platelets are formed when a big cell breaks up. A big white blood cell breaks up into very tiny pieces. You can see here, these tiny pieces. And the purpose of this platelet is in clotting. You know, when you bleed, so when this minion is sliced open, it's bleeding. It doesn't bleed forever, right? Otherwise, it would lose all of its blood. After a while, it stops bleeding. And the reason is because of platelets and some other things. But platelets is very important. And it's going to help clot this blood, make it hard. It's going to make it hard so that it stops bleeding. That way, you don't lose as much blood. Right? So that's important. Otherwise, if you lose too much blood, you could die. So again, platelets, very important. So the big four things you need to know is erythrocytes, are red blood cells carrying oxygen, plasma, in which all of these things are kind of floating in, the liquid part of our blood, leukocytes, white blood cells, which fight infection, platelets, which helps to do blood clotting once you're bleeding. Now, if we actually take a look at, can you imagine what it's actually going to look like if we look under a microscope into our blood? What do you suspect it's going to look like? Your answer should be, you should almost only be able to see erythrocytes because they are 60% of our blood. And the other, they're 40%. And 60% is just liquid, which we cannot really see under a microscope. So under a microscope, you will almost only see erythrocytes. So let me show you. Here we have what you can see under a microscope. I'm going to make it big. Look, what do we see? All these red things. We can't see the plasma because plasma is a transparent liquid. It's like water. You can't see it. It's here, but you can't see it. Okay, so we can see so many red blood cells. That's because most of our blood is red blood cells, right? It's what makes our blood look red. Then we also have this. Look at this. This kind of looks like this image here, right? It's a white blood cell. Now there are different kinds of white blood cells, so they don't all look the same. So for example, this one is also a white blood cell, but it looks slightly different. So there are different types of white blood cells, but you don't need to know that. Just know if they don't look like a red blood cell, then they're a white blood cell. And then you can see these very tiny fragments. What do you think they are? That's going to be our platelets, right? They're going to help us in clotting. They're very tiny. So I hope this picture gives you a better idea of what our blood really looks like, okay? If you think about the proportions, it makes a lot of sense. Red blood cells the most, then our leukocytes and our platelets, very small. Okay, now here's a summary so you can read this. I talk about plasma, erythrocytes, leukocytes, and platelets. And we know the function of blood. It's pretty much to carry. So inside our blood, we have all of these things, right? Which have their own functions. But blood, other than these things, a very, 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 very small amount of blood. It takes up a very, very small space in the blood. Is other nutrients and other things like that. Okay, and the purpose of blood is to move these nutrients across our body so that our cells that need it can have it. So I'll show you what I mean. So say we talk about nutrients. Inside our blood, there will also be nutrients, but very, very little, right? Nothing compared to the amount of red blood cells, and they're very tiny, so you cannot even see them under a microscope. It's so small you cannot see it, even with a microscope. So let's say, where do you think nutrients are from? We want to play a guessing game here, right? I think you can do this, so that's why I hid the answers. So I want you to guess where nutrients will come from in our body and where the blood will take it, because the nutrients will go into the blood and the blood will flow and take it to a specific place that it needs to be. So where do you think nutrients come from? Okay, if you said your intestines, you're right. So remember, your intestines is a little organ in your belly that's where the food will go to, and the intestines will absorb it, take it from the intestines into our bloodstream. Our bloodstream, right, this is in our blood vessels, will move it around to all the cells that need it. So all the cells can now receive these nutrients and survive. What about oxygen? Where do you think, what's the source of oxygen and what's the destination? So we know oxygen comes from the air around us, and our lungs will make sure to put it inside our bloodstream. And once it's in our bloodstream, the blood will move around from point A to B, and in this case, point B will be any cell or any tissue that needs the oxygen to survive, right? Kind of like these two are the same. Cells are all tissues, same thing. What about carbon dioxide? That's the waste product, right? That's the thing we want to get rid of. So it's going to be the opposite of this oxygen one. It's going to come from all the cells that made it, all those cells that made this waste product, and it's going to be taken to the lungs that will get rid of it. What about urea? Okay, you probably don't know what urea is. Urea is a little waste product made from the breakdown of proteins. We know proteins, right? It's made from by transcription and translation from our DNA, right? Our DNA is the code, and then transcription and translation will turn that code into a protein, and this protein will have a specific function. Now, proteins can be broken down, and one of the things that is formed is urea, and our body, urea is toxic, so we got to get rid of it. So it comes from all our cells, okay? Because all our cells have proteins, and it will get taken to the kidney, and you'll pee it out. Your kidney will make sure you pee it out. Okay, so that's another thing. Our blood, the blood took this urea and transported it all the way to the kidney. So remember, our blood vessels is like a road, and the blood is pretty much the cars. Okay, it's the things that are going somewhere. Hormones. Okay, hormones is just a little molecule that has a function. It's like a boss. It tells things what to do. Okay, so some glands, some little organs, okay, little glands like your pituitary gland, maybe you've heard of that, your thyroid gland, your adrenal gland. Don't worry about these, but there's little like patches, little glands in your body that make certain hormones. And these hormones will have specific functions on certain cells. So the source of these hormones will depend. Any kind of gland, whether it's your thyroid gland, adrenal gland, pituitary gland, whatever, and it will be taken to whatever cell it needs to act on. So thyroid hormone will act on a specific cell compared to an adrenal gland hormone. Okay, so you don't need to know about this, so I'm not elaborating, but just understand this idea. Now, antibodies. This you'll learn in another chapter, but antibodies are made by a type of white blood cell, specifically a lymphocyte, right? So I just told you that in our blood, we have white blood cells. One specific type of white blood cells is lymphocytes. So leukocytes is a very general name. It's like saying human, okay? Humans can be a baby, an adult, or anything like that, okay? So leukocytes is a broad term, so it has many different types. So one of them is lymphocytes. This is a type of white blood cell. And this one makes antibodies. Antibodies, specifically the B lymphocyte, right? You'll learn about this in another chapter, so don't worry too much. Now, antibodies are supposed to fight infection. So they will go to a target cell, whether it be your own cells, a bacteria, a virus, or whatever, and it's going to pretty much help destroy that destroy that cell. Okay, so the source is the lymphocytes. It will be released into the blood. The blood will carry it to the target cells. Now, last one here is heat. Some parts of your body that is working a lot will generate a lot of heat. And the heat, we know heat likes to go from area of high temperature to low temperature. So your blood will move the temperature from an area that is warm to an area that is cold. It's like when it's really warm outside and you open your door. Suddenly it feels like heat is streaming into your house, right? It's the same thing here. When a certain area of your body gets warm, the blood will disperse or carry that heat to an area that is colder to kind of equal it out a little bit. Okay, it's natural. It's a natural diffusion process. So I think that's it. That's everything that you need to know about the constituents of blood. What is going on inside the blood? The key 4 things, like I said, is these things. If you know this and you know the proportions, you're perfect. That's all you really need to know. And then know some examples of what the blood can do, what it carries, where it goes. All of these things are in the blood, but they're so small that you cannot see them. That's why you only need to know about these things that you can see. The rest are so small and dissolved inside the plasma that you cannot see it. All the nutrients, all the hormones, all those other things, okay? So I hope that was useful, and just stay tuned for the next videos.